The mountain that glows at night. You've heard the story since you were a child. Whispers passed down through generations about the mountain that glows when darkness falls. Not with fire, not with lightning, but with a light that seems to breathe, pulsing gently like a heartbeat, visible only to those who know where to look. The locals call it Mount Luminara, though that name appears in no official records, on no government maps. To cartographers and geologists, it's simply Peak 742 in the Cascade Range, unremarkable except for its elevation of 7,431 feet above sea level. But you know better. You've always known better. Your grandmother told you about it first, when you were maybe 8 or 9 years old, sitting on her porch in the twilight of a summer evening in 1997. She spoke of how her grandmother had seen the glow back in 1873, and how that woman's mother had witnessed it in 1826. The pattern went back further than anyone could remember. This luminescence that appeared without warning, without schedule, following no lunar cycle or seasonal rhythm that anyone could discern. It's not always the same, your grandmother had said, her weathered hands wrapped around a cup of chamomile tea. Sometimes it's blue, like ice lit from within, sometimes green, like the northern lights brought down to earth, and sometimes, though this is rarest, it glows gold, bright as the sun but soft as candlelight. You remember asking her what caused it, this impossible light. She'd smiled then, a knowing smile that contained more questions than answers. That's what you'll have to discover for yourself, child. Every generation sends someone to find out. Some come back with stories, some come back silent, and some... She paused, looking out toward the dark silhouette of the mountains in the distance. Some don't come back at all. That conversation was 26 years ago. You've thought about it nearly every day since. Now you stand at the base of Mount Luminara, your backpack heavy with supplies for a week-long trek, though you suspect you'll need less time than that. The trail begins innocuously enough, winding through Douglas fir and western hemlock, the air thick with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. It's late September, the time when the leaves of the understory maples are just beginning to turn, splashes of gold and crimson against the evergreen backdrop. The first strange thing you notice is the silence. These woods should be full of sound, birds, insects, and the rustle of small mammals in the undergrowth. Instead, there's only the whisper of wind through the branches and your own breathing, steady and measured. It's not an oppressive silence, not threatening. If anything, it feels expectant, as though the mountain itself is holding its breath, waiting to see if you're worthy of its secrets. You hike for 3 hours before the trail begins to climb in earnest. The trees thin gradually, replaced by hardy shrubs and clusters of wildflowers that shouldn't still be blooming this late in the season. Yet here they are, lupine in shades of purple and blue, Indian paintbrush blazing red and orange, and delicate white avalanche lilies that typically flower in early summer. You stop to examine them, noting how they seem to lean toward the summit, all oriented in the same direction, as though drawn by some invisible force. By late afternoon, you've reached an elevation of approximately 4,000 feet. The air is noticeably thinner and cooler, and you stop to rest beside a stream that tumbles down from somewhere higher up the mountain. The water is crystal clear, so transparent you can count every pebble in its bed, every small trout darting between the rocks. You fill your canteen and drink deeply, surprised by how sweet it tastes, almost honey-like, completely unlike any mountain water you've encountered before. As you sit there, listening to the musical rush of the stream, you notice something peculiar about the rocks. They're not the typical granite or basalt you'd expect in this range. Instead, they have a faintly crystalline structure, catching the slanting afternoon light and fracturing it into subtle rainbows. You pick up a small stone, no larger than your palm, and turn it over in your hand. It's warm, warmer than it should be, given that it was submerged in ice-cold water moments ago. You pocket the stone and continue climbing. The sun is setting when you reach what appears to be a natural campsite, a small plateau protected on 3 sides by rock formations that will shield you from the wind. You set up your tent quickly, working with the practiced efficiency of someone who's spent countless nights in the wilderness. As you're driving in the final stake, you glance up toward the summit, still perhaps 2,000 feet above you. And that's when you see it for the first time. It starts as nothing more than a faint shimmer, barely distinguishable from the last rays of sunlight playing across the rock face. But as the sky darkens from blue to indigo to black, the glow intensifies. It's blue tonight, the color of deep ice, of glacial lakes, of sapphires held up to candlelight. It doesn't emanate from one point, but seems to suffuse the entire upper third of the mountain, pulsing gently, rhythmically, with a period of roughly 8 seconds from one peak of brightness to the next. You stand transfixed, watching as the light ebbs and flows, and you understand viscerally why your grandmother's eyes had held such wonder when she spoke of it. It's not merely beautiful, though it is beautiful, achingly so. It's alive in some fundamental way that transcends any scientific explanation you can conjure. This is not bioluminescence, not phosphorescence, and not any natural phenomenon you've studied or read about. This is something else entirely. You force yourself to eat dinner, freeze-dried beef stroganoff reconstituted with the mountain's sweet water, though you can barely taste it. Your eyes keep returning to the summit, to that impossible blue glow. You've brought instruments, of course. A Geiger counter to measure radiation, a spectrometer to analyze the light's wavelength, and a magnetometer to detect any unusual electromagnetic fields. Tomorrow you'll use them, you tell yourself. Tomorrow you'll approach this scientifically and methodically. But tonight you simply watch. Hours pass. The glow doesn't diminish or fade, but maintains its steady pulse. That 8-second rhythm that reminds you of breathing, of a heart beating, of waves upon a shore. You find your own breathing, synchronizing with it unconsciously. And when you notice, you don't stop. There's something oddly comforting about it. This connection to something vast and unexplainable. You don't remember falling asleep, but you wake to full darkness and the sound of footsteps outside your tent. Not heavy footsteps. Nothing that suggests a bear or a mountain lion. These are light, almost hesitant, and distinctly bipedal. Human, or something very much like human. Your heart hammers in your chest as you reach for your flashlight, but before you can turn it on, a voice speaks from just beyond the tent's thin nylon wall. You came. It's a woman's voice, aged but not frail, carrying the kind of authority that comes from decades of being listened to and believed. You recognize something in the cadence, in the particular way she shapes her vowels, though you can't quite place it. I came, you reply, surprised by how steady your own voice sounds. Your grandmother said you would eventually. She was right, as always. You unzip the tent and emerge into the night. The blue glow from the summit provides enough light to see by, and what you see stops your breath in your throat. The woman standing before you is old, perhaps 70, perhaps 80. It's difficult to tell. She's dressed in practical hiking clothes that have seen better days, and her face is weathered by sun and wind and time, but her eyes are sharp, intelligent, and unmistakably familiar. You begin, but she cuts you off with a gentle shake of her head. I'm one of the ones who didn't come back, she says simply. Or rather, I came back changed, which amounts to much the same thing in the end. You want to ask 1,000 questions, but she gestures toward the summit, toward the pulsing blue light. Walk with me, she says. We don't have much time. It only shows itself fully one night in every lunar cycle, and tonight is that night. If you want your answers, we need to climb. You don't hesitate. You pull on your boots, grab your jacket, and pack, leaving the tent where it stands, and follow her up the mountain. She moves with surprising agility for her age, following a path that's barely visible even in the strange blue luminescence. You notice she doesn't use a flashlight and doesn't seem to need one. The glow from above appears to respond to her presence, brightening slightly where she steps, as though the mountain recognizes her and approves. How long have you been here? You ask as you climb, your breath coming harder now as the altitude increases. In mountain time, 37 years. In the time I remember from before, sometimes it feels like yesterday, sometimes like centuries. She pauses, turning to look back at you. Time moves differently here. You'll understand soon enough. The path grows steeper and more treacherous. You're scrambling now more than hiking, using your hands as much as your feet. The rock beneath your palms is warm, almost fever hot, and that crystalline quality you noticed earlier is more pronounced. The entire mountain seems to be constructed of this strange stone, faceted and gleaming, catching and refracting the blue light into infinite cascading patterns. You're perhaps 500 feet from the summit when you hear it, a sound like singing, though not quite. It's more fundamental than that, more primal. It reminds you of the way Tibetan singing bowls resonate, that deep harmonic that you feel in your bones as much as hear with your ears. The sound seems to come from everywhere and nowhere, from the rock beneath you, from the air around you, and from somewhere deep inside your own chest. What is that? You whisper, though you're not sure why you're whispering. The mountain's voice, the woman replies. It speaks in frequencies most people can't perceive, but you can hear it, can't you? That's why you're here. That's why the mountain called you. Called you. The phrase resonates with truth. Because isn't that exactly how it's felt all these years? Not a curiosity or an interest, but a summons, patient and persistent, waiting for the moment when you'd finally answer. The summit plateau is larger than you expected, perhaps 200 feet across, relatively flat and ringed by formations of that crystalline rock that thrust upward like the walls of some ancient temple. And in the center, the source of the glow. It's not a thing, exactly. It's more like a place where the boundary between the material and immaterial grows thin, where the bedrock of reality becomes translucent enough to see through to something beyond. The blue light wells up from a fissure in the stone, no wider than your arm span, but impossibly deep. When you peer into it, You see depth upon depth, layer upon layer of light and shadow and movement, though what moves down there you cannot say. What is it? You ask, though you suspect there may be no answer, no words adequate to the question. The woman moves to stand beside you, looking down into that luminous abyss with an expression of mingled reverence and familiarity. Every culture has a name for places like this, she says. The Greeks called them omphalos, the navel of the world. The Chinese speak of dragon lines, the Aboriginals of song lines. This mountain sits at the convergence of something, energies, ley lines, whatever terminology makes sense to you. It's a thin place where the membrane between what is and what could be grows permeable. You kneel at the edge of the fissure, feeling the heat rising from it, though it's not an uncomfortable heat. It's warm like sunlight, like an embrace, like coming home after a long journey. The singing grows louder and more complex, and you realize you're beginning to distinguish individual voices within the harmonic whole. Some sound human, others decidedly not. There are tones that remind you of whale songs, of wind through canyon rocks, of ice cracking on a frozen lake, and beneath it all, a deep thrumming bass note that might be the mountain's heartbeat, or the planet's slow rotation, the background radiation of the universe itself. Touch it, the woman says softly. That's why you came, isn't it? To understand. You reach out, extending your hand toward the light. Your fingers pass through the blue luminescence, and it feels like nothing and everything simultaneously. Cool water, warm air, silk, stone, and music made tangible. And then, in an instant, everything changes. You're no longer kneeling on a mountain summit in the Cascade Range, or rather you are, but you're also everywhere the mountain has ever been, when it has existed. You see it thrust upward from the ocean floor in some inconceivable past, lava and pressure and tectonic violence giving birth to stone. You see it weathered by glaciers during ice ages whose names you don't know, carved and shaped by frozen rivers of ice a mile thick. You see it witness the passage of peoples, first the indigenous tribes who knew its secret and came here for vision quests and rites of passage, then European explorers who saw only a geographic feature to be mapped and measured, then modern hikers and climbers who pass by without ever seeing what it truly is. And you see the others who came before you, the seekers and the called, the ones who felt the summons and answered. Some stayed for days, some for years, some, like the woman beside you, for decades. A few returned to the world below, carrying what they learned like a secret flame sheltered against the wind. Others integrated so completely with the mountain's mystery that they became part of it, their consciousness diffusing into stone and light, and that eternal singing. You see your grandmother, young and vibrant, standing exactly where you stand now in 1963, her hand extended toward the light, just as yours is. You see her choose to return, to carry the knowledge back down the mountain, to plant it like a seed in fertile soil and tend it carefully over the decades, watering it with stories and wonder until it grew strong enough in you to bring you here. You understand in that moment that this is not a place of answers, but of questions. Better questions, deeper questions, questions that don't demand resolution, but invite endless exploration. The mountain doesn't glow to illuminate anything external. It glows because it is illumination itself, consciousness made visible. the universe examining itself through countless eyes across countless ages. Your hand is still extended, still touching the light, though now you can feel threads of connection extending from that point of contact, filaments of energy and awareness branching out in all directions. Some thread backward through time, connecting you to every person who stood in this spot and reached out just as you're reaching. Others extend forward, toward people not yet born who will someday answer this same call. And still others stretch sideways through dimensions you can barely conceive, touching other thin places, other mountains and valleys and sacred sites scattered across the globe, like acupuncture points on the body of the world. You're crying, you realize, though whether from joy or sorrow or simple overwhelm, you cannot say. The tears feel appropriate somehow, necessary, as though your body needs some way to release the pressure of so much understanding arriving all at once. How long does it last? You hear yourself ask, your voice sounding distant and strange. How long can I stay here? The woman's hand touches your shoulder, gentle and grounding. As long as you need, as long as you can bear. The mountain is patient. It's been here for millions of years. It will be here for millions more. Time enough for everything. You don't know how long you kneel there, your hand in the light, drinking in visions and sensations and knowings that have no names in any language you speak. It might be minutes, it might be hours. The blue glow never wavers, never fades, maintaining its steady 8-second pulse like a cosmic metronome, marking time in a dimension where time means something entirely different than you've ever understood it to mean. Eventually, gradually, you become aware of returning to yourself, or of yourself expanding to encompass both the ordinary consciousness you've always known and this new, larger awareness that the mountain has awakened. You withdraw your hand from the light, and it's like pulling away from a lover, bittersweet and necessary. You sit back on your heels, breathing hard, as though you've been running. The woman settles beside you, and in the blue glow, you can see she's smiling. You see now, she says. It's not a question. I see, you confirm, though even as you say it, you know that what you've seen is only the tiniest fraction of what could be seen, what might be understood if you spent lifetimes here instead of hours. What will you do? She asks. Stay like I did, or go back down like your grandmother? It's the question you've been avoiding, the choice you knew you'd have to make from the moment you started up the trail. To stay would mean abandoning your life below, your work, your relationships, and the comfortable patterns of existence you've built over decades. But it would also mean unlimited access to this mystery, the chance to explore these depths without constraint or deadline. To leave would mean returning to ordinary consciousness, to a world that would seem diminished and flat after what you've experienced here. But it would also mean carrying this knowledge back, becoming a seed planter like your grandmother, and preparing the ground for whoever comes next. You think about your grandmother's stories, about how she'd made her choice at age 24 and lived with it for the next 59 years. You think about the quiet satisfaction in her eyes when she looked at you, knowing that the seed she'd planted had taken root and grown true. You think about the others who might be out there even now, feeling that faint, persistent tug toward this place, not yet understanding what calls them, but knowing somehow that an answer waits. I'll go back, you hear yourself say, and as the words leave your mouth, you feel their rightness settle into your bones. But not yet. How long do I have before the glow fades? Until dawn, the woman replies. When the sun rises, the light will withdraw, and the mountain will sleep again until the next cycle. You have perhaps 6 more hours. 6 hours. It seems simultaneously like no time at all, and all the time in the world. You spend them learning. The woman who tells you her name is Margaret, though she says it's been so long since anyone called her that it sounds foreign to her own ears, teaches you to read the patterns in the light, to distinguish the different voices in the mountain's song, and to feel the slow movement of energies through the stone beneath your feet. She shows you how to extend your awareness along those filament threads you perceived earlier to briefly touch other consciousnesses, other moments, and other possibilities. She teaches you the mountain's history, or what parts of it she's pieced together during her 3 decades of residence, how it was considered sacred by the indigenous peoples who lived in these valleys for 10,000 years before European contact, how they sent their young people here for vision quests, for initiation ceremonies, and for healing, how they understood that the mountain was alive in ways that transcended mere geology, that it was conscious and aware, and occasionally willing to share its awareness with those who approached it properly. She teaches you about the others who've come, scientists and mystics, seekers and skeptics, each bringing their own frameworks for understanding what they encountered. Some tried to explain it through quantum physics, speaking of zero-point fields and consciousness fields and non-local correlations. Others reached for spiritual vocabularies, talking about chakras and auras and astral planes. A few simply accepted it as a mystery, requiring no explanation beyond its own existence. The mountain doesn't care what framework you use, Margaret tells you, as the first hints of grey begin to appear in the eastern sky. It responds to intention, to openness, to genuine curiosity. The words you wrap around the experience afterward, those are just tools to help you carry it back down into the world. Use whatever tools work for you. As dawn approaches, you feel the light beginning to change. The blue deepens, intensifies, like a final flare before subsiding. The singing grows richer, more complex, as though the mountain is offering one last gift before withdrawing. You stand at the edge of the fissure one final time, Margaret beside you, and you look down into those luminous depths. You think about all the people who've stood here before you and all who will stand here after. You think about your grandmother, young and uncertain, making her choice. You think about yourself, however many years from now, perhaps returning to make a different choice, to stay instead of leaving. Will I remember? You ask. All of this. Will it stay with me once I'm back down there? Margaret considers the question carefully. You'll remember, she says finally, but not the way you remember ordinary things. It'll be more like a knowing that sits beneath your other knowing, a foundation you can build on. Sometimes you'll doubt it, especially when you're tired or stressed or caught up in the mundane necessities of life. But it'll always be there, and in your quiet moments, you'll be able to touch it again. The sun breaks over the eastern horizon, and the blue light withdraws like a tide going out. It doesn't vanish instantaneously, but fades gradually, sinking back down into the fissure, into the stone, into whatever realm it inhabits, when it's not visible to human eyes. The singing diminishes to a whisper, then to silence, though you suspect that if you listen carefully enough, with the right quality of attention, you'd still be able to hear it. In the growing daylight, the summit looks almost ordinary, just rock and sparse vegetation, no different from 1,000 other mountain peaks. But you know better now. You've seen what hides beneath the surface, what waits for the right moment, the right person, and the right question. Margaret walks you back down to where you left your tent. In the morning light, she looks more substantial somehow, less ghostly, though there's still something not quite solid about her, as though she's perpetually on the verge of dissolving into light. "Will I see you again?" you ask as you begin breaking down your camp. "If you come back," she says. "I'm here most nights, whether the mountain glows or not. I've learned to see its light even when it's not visible. That's the gift of staying. You don't have to wait for the cycle anymore. The mountain is always present to you." You shoulder your pack, taking one last look up toward the summit. In daylight, you can barely make out the plateau where you spent the night, though you know you'll carry a perfect memory of it for the rest of your life. The hike down is faster than the climb up, with gravity and familiarity speeding your descent. By noon, you're back at the trailhead, loading your gear into your car. You're exhausted. You've been awake for over 24 hours, but it's a good exhaustion, the kind that comes from having done something significant, something that matters. You drive home through the afternoon, watching the mountain shrink in your rearview mirror until it's just a distant peak among other peaks, indistinguishable to the casual eye. But you know its secret now. You carry it with you, wrapped carefully in your chest like a coal that will never quite go cold. In the weeks and months that follow, you find yourself returning to that night again and again in your mind, examining it from different angles, discovering new facets each time. You write about it carefully, choosing your words with the precision of someone handling something precious and fragile. You share the stories with people who seem ready to hear them, who have that particular quality of openness that suggests they might one day feel the mountains call themselves. And sometimes, on clear nights when the moon is dark, you look toward the mountains and think you can see a faint blue glow in the distance, though it might be only memory, only hope. It doesn't matter. You know it's there, whether visible or not. You know the mountain keeps its patient vigil, glowing in the darkness, singing its ancient song, waiting for the next person who will climb its slopes and extend their hand toward the light. You think about your grandmother often, understanding now the weight of the choice she made, discipline required to live with such knowledge without being consumed by it. You wonder if she ever regretted coming back down, if she ever lay awake at night thinking about Margaret and the others who stayed, wondering what depths they've explored that she will never know. But mostly you feel gratitude for her stories, for her patience, for the seed she planted that grew into your own journey. And you begin, carefully and deliberately, to plant seeds of your own, to water them with wonder and tend them with stories, hoping that somewhere among the people you touch, one will grow strong enough to answer the mountain's call when their time comes. Because that's how it works. You understand now. The mountain doesn't need everyone to come. It only needs those who are called, who will listen, and who will make the climb and reach out toward the light. And it only needs some of those to return carry the knowing back down into the world, to keep the cycle turning, generation after generation, ensuring that the mountain secret remains alive in human consciousness, a mystery perpetually renewed, never solved, but always inviting exploration. You are one link in a chain that stretches back into prehistory and forward into a future you'll never see. And that's enough. More than enough. It's everything. The forest that moves on its own. In the highlands of what is now called Transylvania, there existed a forest that the locals refused to name. They called it only the woods that walk, or the trees with feet, and they marked its boundaries with stones painted red, warning travellers to go around, never through. This was in the year 1743, though the forest had been moving long before any calendar marked time in those mountains. Elena first heard of the forest from her grandmother, who heard it from her grandmother, who claimed to have seen it shift positions between the valley and the ridge over the course of a single lifetime. The old woman said the forest had once stood 3 miles to the east, covering the meadow where the village now kept its sheep. She said the trees moved slowly, so slowly that you could watch one for a year and never see it take a step, but that if you looked away and then looked back after many seasons, you would find it had travelled far. Elena was 24 years old when she decided to find the truth. She had spent her whole life in the village of Brasov, working in her father's workshop, binding books and copying manuscripts for the monastery. She had read everything the monks would allow her to read, and many things they would not, and in all those pages she had never found a single mention of a forest that could move. Yet everyone in her village spoke of it as fact, as certain as the sunrise, as real as the mountains themselves. On the morning of the 15th of March, 1743, Elena packed a leather satchel with bread, cheese, dried meat, a tinderbox, 2 candles, her journal, and 3 quills with a bottle of ink. She told her father she was visiting her aunt in the next valley, kissed her younger brother goodbye, and set out before dawn when the air was still sharp with winter's memory. The red stones marked the forest's current boundary along the old Roman road, about 2 miles north of the village. Elena had passed these stones 100 times in her life, but had never stepped beyond them. The superstition ran deep, enforced not by law, but by fear that had calcified over generations into something harder than any rule. She crossed the boundary at mid-morning, when the sun had climbed high enough to cast short shadows. The moment she stepped past the red stones, she felt a change in the air. Not magical exactly, but different. The way the air feels different inside a church or a cave. The forest before her was dense with oak and beech, their trunks massive and ancient, their roots breaking through the earth in twisted coils that looked almost like fingers grasping at the soil. Elena walked for an hour, marking her path by breaking small branches at eye level, a trick her brother had taught her. The forest was quieter than she expected. No birds sang, no squirrels chattered in the branches. The only sound was her own footsteps on the carpet of old leaves and the whisper of wind through the canopy high above. She found the first sign 2 hours after entering. It was a root, thick as her thigh, that had broken the surface of the earth in a way that looked almost deliberate. The root stretched across her path like a serpent, and where it emerged from the ground, the soil was freshly disturbed, dark and moist, as if the tree had only just pushed it up through the earth. Elena knelt and touched the exposed root. It was warm, warmer than it should have been in the cool spring air. She wrote in her journal, "Root feels alive in a way that ordinary roots do not, as if blood moves through it instead of the sap." Elena continued deeper. The trees grew larger as she went, their trunks so wide that 5 men holding hands could not have circled them. The bark was strange, too, rougher than normal oak, with patterns that almost looked like faces if you stared long enough. Sad faces, angry faces, faces frozen in eternal surprise. She touched one of these patterns, tracing what might have been an eye, and the bark felt warm beneath her fingers, pulsing faintly with something that might have been a heartbeat or might have been her imagination. At noon, she stopped to eat. She sat with her back against one of the massive trees and unwrapped her bread and cheese. As she ate, she watched the forest around her, looking for any sign of movement. The trees stood perfectly still, as trees should. Nothing walked, nothing shifted. She began to wonder if the stories were just stories after all, myths created to explain ordinary things. Perhaps the forest had simply grown over time, spreading naturally, and people had mistaken its slow expansion for deliberate movement. Then she heard the sound. It was deep, so deep she felt it in her chest before she heard it with her ears. A groaning, creaking sound, like the hull of a great ship straining against heavy seas. Elena stood quickly, scattering crumbs, her heart suddenly racing. The sound came again, and this time she could tell it came from all around her, from the trees themselves, as if they were speaking to each other in a language of wood and fibre. She backed away from the tree she had been leaning against and saw that the pattern in its bark, the face she had traced with her finger, had changed. The eye was now open wider, and the mouth, which before had been a neutral line, now curved downward in what might have been sorrow or warning. Elena ran. She ran back the way she had come, following her broken branches, her satchel bouncing against her hip. Groaning sound followed her, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, sometimes all around. She did not look back. She did not stop. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs trembled, ran until she burst through the tree line and stumbled past the red stones, collapsing on the safe side of the boundary. She lay in the grass, gasping, her face pressed against the earth. When she finally gathered the courage to look back, the forest stood exactly as it had before, silent and still, revealing nothing. But Elena had seen enough. She knew now that the stories were true. The forest was alive in a way that ordinary forests were not, and it was aware of her. She returned to the village and told no one what had happened. She went back to her father's workshop and resumed her work, binding books and copying manuscripts. But every day she thought about the forest. She read everything she could find about forests, about trees, about ancient magics and old gods. She read Roman histories that mentioned dark groves where druids practiced forbidden rites. She read Christian texts that spoke of demons dwelling in wild places. She read folk tales from 12 different lands, all telling variations of the same story. Trees that walked, forests that thought, woods that hungered. 3 months passed. Summer came, thick and warm, filling the valley with the scent of wildflowers and new grass. Elena continued her research, filling journal after journal with notes and theories. She became obsessed, barely sleeping, barely eating, until her father grew concerned and her brother began to worry that she had been cursed. On the 21st of June, the summer solstice, Elena returned to the forest. This time she came prepared. She brought rope, chalk, a knife, more food, and a small bronze mirror that had belonged to her grandmother. She also brought something else, a cutting from a willow tree, still green and living, which she had kept in water for the past week, encouraging it to grow roots. She crossed the red stones at dawn and entered the forest with her head high and her fear carefully controlled. She went deeper this time, past the place where she had eaten lunch on her first visit, past the tree with the changing face, deeper into the heart of the moving wood. The trees here were even larger, so tall that their tops disappeared into a canopy so thick that only scattered needles of sunlight penetrated to the forest floor. The trunks were covered in moss that glowed faintly green in the dim light, and mushrooms grew in rings around their bases, white mushrooms with red spots, the kind her grandmother had warned her never to touch. Lena found what she was looking for in a clearing, though calling it a clearing was not quite right. It was more like a space where the trees had chosen not to grow, a perfect circle about 30 feet across, carpeted with soft grass that seemed too green, too perfect, to be natural. In the center of the circle stood a single stone, dark and smooth, carved with symbols that Elena did not recognize. She approached it slowly, her hand on the knife at her belt, though she knew a knife would be useless against whatever power dwelled here. She knelt before the stone and placed the willow cutting on its surface. Then she spoke, her voice steady despite her hammering heart. I come seeking knowledge, not to harm or take. I offer this living gift in exchange for understanding. Why do you move? What do you seek? For a long moment, nothing happened. The forest remained silent. Elena waited, counting her breaths, forcing herself to stay calm. Then the stone began to warm beneath the willow cutting. The warmth spread, and the cutting's roots, which Elena had carefully encouraged to grow, began to lengthen and thicken before her eyes. They grew down into the stone, impossibly, as if the stone were soft earth, and the willow's leaves unfurled and reached upward toward the distant sky. The groaning sound came again, but softer this time, almost gentle, and Elena understood, not through words, but through feeling, through a knowledge that seemed to pour directly into her mind. The forest was answering her. The forest had been moving for thousands of years, since long before humans built their villages in these mountains. It moved because it was searching, slowly wandering across the land, seeking something it had lost in an age before memory. What it sought, the forest itself had forgotten. It knew only that it must continue searching, must keep moving, driven by an ancient purpose that had become instinct. The trees were not individual beings, but parts of a greater whole, like fingers on a hand or leaves on a branch. The forest itself was the creature, and it thought in seasons rather than moments, planned in decades rather than days. It moved by growing new roots ahead, while the old roots behind slowly died, a process so gradual that even the longest-lived human would see only the slightest shift. Elena understood all this in an instant, the way you understand a dream upon waking. The knowledge came with a cost, a terrible loneliness that made her gasp and press her hands to her chest. The forest was alone, utterly alone, the last of its kind. There had been others once, other forests that thought and moved, covering the world in green consciousness. But they had been burned, cut down, built over, destroyed by the small, quick creatures who had no patience for things that moved slowly and thought in centuries. This forest survived only because it had learned to hide, to seem ordinary, to move so slowly that humans dismissed the stories as superstition. But it was dying anyway, not from violence, but from loneliness, from the slow erosion of purpose. It had been searching for so long that it could no longer remember what it sought, and without purpose, even a forest mind begins to feed. Elena wept. She wept for the forest and for herself, for all the lonely things in the world that search for connection they can never find. Her tears fell on the stone and on the willow cutting that now grew from it, and the forest felt her grief and understood that she, too, was searching for something she could not name. The willow grew faster, its trunk thickening, its branches spreading. In the span of hours, it became a young tree, then a mature tree, its roots diving deep into the stone and through it into the earth beneath. The forest accepted this gift, this living bridge between Elena's world and its own, and through the willow it spoke more clearly. It showed her memories, visions that unfolded in her mind like stories. She saw the forest as it had been 10,000 years ago, stretching from one horizon to the other, connected to a dozen other forest minds across a world that was mostly wild. She saw how they had communicated through roots that touched beneath the earth, sharing thoughts across vast distances, thinking slow, deep thoughts about the nature of growth and decay, light and darkness, life and death. She saw the first humans arrive, small and quick and terrified, seeking shelter beneath the branches. The forests had not minded. There was room enough for everyone, and the humans were interesting, with their fast thoughts and their strange ability to change the world around them, with tools and fire. The forests had watched with curiosity as the humans built shelters, planted crops, domesticated animals, created societies. But the humans multiplied faster than the forests had anticipated. They cut trees for fuel and building, cleared land for farming, burned the woods to drive out predators. They did not understand that some forests were alive in a way that other forests were not, that some groves were individual minds that could feel pain and loss. Or perhaps they understood and did not care, driven by their own needs, their own desperate search for safety and prosperity. One by one, the forest minds died, cut down, burned, drowned beneath rising seas, paved over with stone roads and cities. They died calling out to each other through their root networks, their last thoughts shared across diminishing distances until only silence remained. This forest, the last one, had survived by retreating to the mountains, to places too steep and rocky for easy farming, too remote for cities. It moved constantly, following the wild spaces, staying ahead of the expanding human world. But the wild spaces were shrinking. Every year, the forest had fewer places to go. Every decade, it grew more difficult to hide. Elena saw all this and understood that she was witnessing the end of something ancient and irreplaceable. In 100 years, perhaps less, this forest would have nowhere left to move. It would be discovered, studied, cut down for timber, or cleared for farmland, or simply burned, because people fear what they cannot understand. Unless something changed. Elena opened her eyes, unaware that she had closed them. The sun had moved. Hours had passed while she communed with the forest mind. The willow tree was now fully grown, as tall as the surrounding oaks. its silver-green leaves rustling in a breeze Elena could not feel. Through its roots, she remained connected to the forest, could feel its thoughts like a second heartbeat alongside her own. She spoke aloud, forming the thought that had been growing in her mind. What if people knew, not as superstition, but as truth? What if they understood what you are, what you represent? Would they protect you, or would they fear you more? The forest's response was complex, layered with centuries of experience. Some humans might protect it, yes, but others would seek to destroy it precisely because they understood its power. And still others would want to study it, dissect it, understand how it worked, which would be a different kind of death. The forest had survived by remaining a myth, a story told to frighten children and amuse travelers. To be revealed would be to be destroyed. Elena sat back on her heels, thinking. She was a scholar, trained to preserve knowledge, to copy texts and maintain records. Every instinct told her to document what she had discovered, to write down everything the forest had shown her, to share this incredible finding with the world. But she was also human enough to understand what that would mean. The scholars would come, then the curious, then the fearful, then the soldiers with their axes and torches. Then, I will keep your secret, she said finally. But I will visit you if you allow it. I will walk with you as you move through the mountains. I will be your witness, even if I can never tell anyone what I have witnessed. The forest considered this. Elena felt its deliberation, slow and careful as roots seeking water through stone. Finally, it agreed. More than agreed. It welcomed her. In all the long centuries of its existence, it had never had a companion who truly understood what it was. The loneliness had been growing unbearable. Even if Elena could only stay for brief moments of her brief life, even if she would die in what was, to the forest, barely an eye blink of time, still it was grateful for the connection. They made a pact that day, Elena and the forest. She would come once every new moon, would sit in the clearing with the willow tree, would share her thoughts and receive the forest's slow wisdom in return. She would keep its secret, would mark its boundaries with the red stones, would ensure that the villagers continued to fear and avoid it. In exchange, the forest would share its memories, would teach her things that no book could contain, would show her a perspective on time and existence that no human had ever known. For 37 years, Elena kept that pact. She never married, never left the valley, never spoke of what she knew. She continued to work in her father's workshop, and after he died, she ran it herself, becoming known as the finest bookbinder in the region. She trained her brother's children in the craft, teaching them to respect knowledge and guard secrets, though she never told them the greatest secret of all. Every month, on the night of the new moon, she would tell her apprentices she needed to gather herbs in the mountains, and she would walk to wherever the forest had moved itself. Sometimes she had to walk for miles, following the slowly shifting boundary marked by the red stones that she quietly moved to match the forest's migration. Sometimes the forest had barely traveled at all, its roots settling in a location for years before moving on. She watched the forest shift northward, always northward over the decades. She calculated that it moved approximately 1 mile every 7 years, though the pace was not constant. Some years it moved quickly, as much as half a mile. Other years it barely moved at all, its roots holding firm as if it had found a place it particularly liked. Through the willow tree, the forest told her its thoughts. It spoke of the changing seasons with an intimacy that only something that had witnessed 10,000 springs could know. It told her how the winter of 1752 had been the coldest in 300 years, how the summer of 1768 had been so wet that mushrooms grew thick as carpets on its floor. It spoke of the animals that sheltered in its shade, the wolves that denned among its roots, the owls that nested in its highest branches, the deer that came to browse on the saplings at its edges. Elena, in turn, told the forest about the human world. She told it about the books she bound, the stories they contained, the ideas that humans created and shared through writing. She explained wars and religions, art and science, love and loss. The forest listened with fascination to these tales of the quick, bright creatures who lived such intense, brief lives. In 1779, when Elena was 60 years old, she noticed that the forest had stopped moving. For 3 years, it remained in the same location, its roots settled deep into a valley between two peaks. She asked it why, and it showed her. Beneath this valley ran the aquifer, a river of pure water flowing through limestone caves, and the water tasted of minerals and time. The forest was drinking deeply, storing strength for the journey ahead. In 1780, the soldiers came. They were Austrian troops marching through the mountains on their way to some distant conflict Elena did not understand. They made camp in the valley below the forest, and their officers, seeing the dense woods, ordered their men to cut timber for fires and fortifications. The soldiers took their axes and approached the red stones. Elena, in her workshop 3 miles away, felt a cold dread settle over her heart. She could not say how she knew, but she knew. The forest was in danger. She left her work unfinished, ignored her apprentice's questions, and ran. Actually ran, though she was 60 years old and had not run in years. Up the mountain path toward the forest. She arrived to find the soldiers already cutting. They'd crossed the boundary marked by the red stones, dismissed the local warnings as superstition, and begun felling the outer trees. Elena watched in horror as a massive oak, one she had touched 100 times, crashed to the earth with a groan that sounded exactly like a scream. She felt the forest's pain through the connection they shared, a sharp agony that made her stumble and fall to her knees. The soldiers were not just cutting trees, they were cutting flesh, severing nerves, causing wounds that would take decades to heal if they healed at all. Elena stood and ran toward the soldiers, shouting at them to stop, but they laughed at the old women and pushed her aside. Their captain, a young man with cold eyes, told her that the empire needed timber more than it needed old-growth forest. She should go home before she got hurt. She refused to leave. She stood between the soldiers and the next tree they had marked for cutting, spreading her arms, daring them to strike her down along with the oak. The captain ordered her removed, and 2 soldiers grabbed her arms and began to drag her away. That was when the forest began to move, not slowly as it had moved for all the centuries of its existence. This time it moved quickly, desperately, like an animal fleeing fire. The roots beneath the earth twisted and writhed. The trees groaned and creaked. The ground itself began to shift and buckle as the forest pulled up its anchoring roots and began to run. The island that appears and vanishes overnight. You've heard the stories your entire life. Dismiss them as sailors' tales, born from too much rum and too little sleep. But standing on the deck of the research vessel at 3 in the morning, Watching the impossible unfold before your eyes, you realize that some legends refuse to stay buried in the past. The island wasn't there at sunset. You're certain of it. You'd scanned the horizon yourself with a high-powered telescope, logged the readings, marked the coordinates. Empty ocean. Nothing but the endless roll of waves beneath the darkening sky. Yet now, in the peculiar light of pre-dawn, there it is, a dark mass rising from the water like a sleeping giant slowly opening one eye. Dr. Sarah Chen stands beside you, her coffee growing cold in her hands. She's muttering calculations under her breath, her scientific mind struggling to reconcile what her instruments are telling her with what her eyes can see. The sonar readings make no sense. The depth charts you'd mapped just hours ago show nothing but ocean floor 300 meters. Now, the instruments insist there's solid ground, vegetation, even what might be structures. This isn't possible, she says for the third time, though her voice carries less conviction with each repetition. You've been part of this oceanographic expedition for 6 months, cataloguing the unexplored regions of the South Pacific. Your team has discovered new species of deep-sea fish, mapped previously uncharted underwater mountains, even found evidence of ancient volcanic activity. But nothing, absolutely nothing, has prepared you for this. The captain, a weathered Indonesian man named Budi, who spent 40 years navigating these waters, crosses himself and whispers something in a language you don't recognize. When you ask him about it later, he'll tell you about the old stories, about Pulau Hantu, the ghost island, about fishermen who'd stumbled upon it over the centuries, finding fresh water and fruit trees and beaches of black sand, only to return the next day and find nothing but open ocean and the lingering question of their own sanity. As the sun begins its slow climb above the horizon, the island becomes more distinct. You can make out individual trees now, their shapes strange and unfamiliar. There's a beach, just as the stories described, with sand so dark it looks like crushed obsidian. Further inland, you spot what appears to be ruins, stone structures covered in creeping vines, their architecture unlike anything you've seen in your studies of Pacific Island cultures. Sarah has her cameras out now, documenting everything. The scientific method demands evidence, verification, peer review, but you can see the tremor in her hands as she adjusts the lens. Some part of her understands that whatever you're witnessing exists beyond the comfortable boundaries of known science. The captain refuses to approach closer than half a kilometer. His crew, usually boisterous and fearless, works in unusual silence, casting nervous glances toward the impossible island. You don't blame them. There's something fundamentally wrong about the way the island sits in the water, as if it's not quite anchored to reality in the same way as the rest of the world. You volunteer to take the inflatable boat closer. Sarah argues against it. Proper protocol would be to document from a distance, to report the finding, to wait for a larger expedition with more resources. But you both know what will happen. By the time approvals come through and a new team assembles, the island will be gone. This is a moment that exists outside of time, and it demands immediate action. The journey across the half-kilometer of water feels both eternal and instantaneous. The island seems to pulse with each stroke of the oars, growing more solid and real as you approach, yet somehow remaining ephemeral, as if it might dissolve back into sea foam at any moment. The water around it moves strangely too. The waves don't break against the shore the way they should. Instead, they seem to pass through it, as if the island exists slightly out of phase with the surrounding ocean. When the inflatable boat's bow finally scrapes against the black sand, you sit for a long moment, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what you're doing. You're about to step onto land that shouldn't exist, that your instruments swear appeared out of nowhere in the span of a few hours. Every rational part of your mind screams that this is impossible, yet here you are. The sand crunches beneath your boots with a sound like breaking glass. It's not actually sand, you realize as you crouch to examine it. It's volcanic rock, ground so fine by some unknown process that it mimics the texture of beach sand. You scoop some into a sample container, already imagining the lab analysis, the questions it will raise, papers that might be written if anyone believes you. The air smells wrong. Not bad, exactly, but different. There's the expected salt of the ocean, but underneath it, something else. Ozone, perhaps, or the metallic tang that comes before a lightning strike. The temperature feels off, too, several degrees cooler than it should be given the tropical climate and the rising sun. You make your way inland, following what might be a path or might simply be a gap in the vegetation. The plants are unlike anything in your field guides. Some resemble ferns, but with leaves that shimmer with an iridescent quality, catching the light in ways that seem to defy standard botanical behavior. Others look almost familiar, similar to breadfruit or pandanus, but with subtle differences in their structure that mark them as something other. The ruins appear suddenly, emerging from the jungle growth, like teeth from diseased gums. They're made of the same black stone as the sand, but carved with precision that suggests advanced tools and mathematical knowledge. The symbols etched into the surfaces aren't any language you recognize, yet there's something hauntingly familiar about their patterns, as if they're tapping into some deep ancestral memory. You photograph everything, your camera clicking in rapid succession, knowing that physical evidence might be all that stands between you and accusations of elaborate hoaxing or mental breakdown. The structures form a rough circle, 12 pillars surrounding a central platform. On that platform sits something that makes your breath catch. A perfect sphere of what looks like polished obsidian, about the size of a basketball, resting in a carved depression. Your hand reaches toward it before your conscious mind registers the movement. The moment your fingers make contact, everything changes. The island lurches beneath you, or perhaps you lurch, or perhaps reality itself shifts slightly on its axis. The sphere is warm, impossibly warm for stone that's been sitting in pre-dawn air. Heat radiates up your arm, but it's not painful. It's almost pleasant, like sinking into a hot bath after a long, cold day. Images flood your mind, too fast to process individually, but living impressions like photographs developing in solution. You see the island rising from the sea, not through geological processes, but through something else. Intention, perhaps, or need. You see people, their faces both familiar and alien, working the stone, building the structures, placing the sphere with reverent care. You see them leaving, walking into the ocean without fear, the water accepting them as if they belonged there more than on land. You see the island sinking, receding, vanishing beneath waves that close over it like a healing wound. You see it rising again and again and again in a cycle that stretches back further than human memory, further perhaps than humanity itself. When you pull your hand away, gasping. The sun has climbed noticeably higher in the sky. Time has passed. Minutes or hours, you can't tell. Your radio crackles with Sarah's voice, tight with worry, demanding to know your status. You respond automatically, assuring her you're fine, that you're returning to the boat, even as your mind struggles to process what just happened. The walk back to the beach feels different. The island seems more solid now, more real, as if your touch somehow anchored it further into existence. Or perhaps it's the opposite. Perhaps you've become less real, partially attuned to whatever strange frequency the island vibrates on. You're halfway across the water, back to the research vessel when you hear it. A sound like singing, but deeper than any human voice could produce. It seems to come from everywhere and nowhere, resonating through the water, through the air, through your very bones. You turn back to look at the island, and for just a moment, you see figures standing on the beach. They're watching you, these impossible people, and though you can't make out their features at this distance, you know they're smiling. By the time you climb aboard the research vessel, your legs shaking from more than just physical exertion, the singing has stopped. Sarah helps you up, firing questions faster than you can answer. The rest of the crew gathers around, their earlier fear overcome by curiosity and the need to know what you found. You tell them everything, knowing how it sounds, watching their expressions shift from excitement to concern to barely concealed skepticism. The photographs will help, you think. The samples will provide proof. But even as you think it, you glance at your camera's display screen and feel your stomach drop. The images are there, technically. The ruins are visible, the strange vegetation, even the sphere. But there's something wrong with them. They're blurred in ways that have nothing to do with camera shake or poor focus. The structures seem to shift position between frames, as if the island couldn't quite decide where its own features should be. The sphere appears in some shots as solid black, in others as translucent, and in one particularly unsettling image, it seems to be looking back at the camera with something distressingly like awareness. Sarah examines the photographs with a deepening frown. She's trying to maintain scientific objectivity, to find rational explanations. Unusual atmospheric conditions, equipment malfunction, anything that fits within the comfortable boundaries of known phenomena. But you can see the doubt creeping into her eyes. This is too strange, too consistent in its strangeness, to be dismissed as simple technical error. The sample container you'd filled with the black sand presents its own mystery. Under the research vessel's microscope, the particles don't behave like volcanic glass should. They seem to move slightly, even in the absence of any vibration or air current, arranging and rearranging themselves into patterns that almost resemble writing. Sarah runs every test she can think of: spectrographic analysis, chemical composition, crystalline structure, and each test returns results that contradict the previous one. As if the substance can't quite decide what it wants to be, Captain Booty keeps the ship at its safe distance, but he's stationed crew members to watch the island constantly. You join them for the vigil as the day progresses, watching the impossible landmass that continues to defy every law of geology and physics by simply existing. During the afternoon, you spot movement on the beach. The same figures you'd glimpsed earlier, though now there are more of them. They don't appear to be doing anything in particular, just existing in their strange, half-real state, occasionally looking out toward the ship, with what might be curiosity or might be warning. As evening approaches, Sarah pulls you aside. She's been on the radio with the expedition's funding organization, trying to report the discovery, and the conversation hasn't gone well. Without more concrete evidence, without data that makes sense within accepted scientific frameworks, they're dismissing it as a hoax or hallucination. They're suggesting contaminated water supplies, collective hysteria, even the possibility of a publicity stunt. Frustration radiates off her in waves. "We need to go back," she says quietly. "Both of us this time. More cameras, more samples, detailed measurements, something that can't be explained away or dismissed as equipment malfunction." You know she's right, but something in your gut twists at the thought of returning to that beach, touching that sphere again. The visions it had shown you weren't just images. They were invitations, or perhaps warnings. The island appears and vanishes for a reason, following some pattern or purpose that your brief contact only hinted at. But scientific curiosity wins out over caution, as it so often does. As the sun begins its descent toward the horizon, you and Sarah prepare another expedition to the island. This time, you bring more equipment: ground-penetrating radar, core sampling tools, electromagnetic field detectors, anything that might provide objective data about this impossible place. The figures on the beach watch as you approach. In the golden light of late afternoon, you can see them more clearly now. They're human in shape, but not quite in substance, as if they're made of water and light and memory, rather than flesh and bone. They don't try to stop you as you land the inflatable boat and haul your equipment onto the black sand. They simply watch, with expressions that might be sadness, or might be something else entirely. Sarah sets up the ground-penetrating radar while you begin taking soil samples. The work is methodical, familiar, grounding. It helps to focus on concrete tasks, to let your hands remember their training, while your mind grapples with the impossible nature of your surroundings. The radar, however, refuses to cooperate. It shows the island extending down into the water, but the readings fluctuate wildly. One moment the island has roots reaching hundreds of meters into the ocean floor. The next moment it appears to be floating on the surface like a lily pad. The next, it seems to exist simultaneously at multiple depths. You make your way back to the ruins, Sarah following close behind. The electromagnetic field detectors are going haywire, their needles swinging back and forth as if caught in an invisible storm. The sphere still sits on its platform, warm and patient, waiting. This time, you approach it with more caution, pulling out a thermal imaging camera first. The camera's display shows the sphere as a point of intense heat, far hotter than it feels to your nearby skin. But it's not radiating that heat into the surrounding air the way physics demands it should. Instead, the thermal energy seems to be flowing into the sphere from somewhere else, as if it's connected to some distant source of power through channels you can't perceive. Sarah reaches out to touch it, but you stop her. "Wait," you say, and spend several minutes explaining what happened when you made contact earlier. The visions, the lost time, the sense of being fundamentally changed by the experience. She listens with the careful attention of a scientist evaluating experimental protocols, then reaches out anyway. Her reaction is different from yours. Where you had been overwhelmed by images and sensations, she seems to achieve some kind of communion with the sphere. Her eyes lose focus, but not in a way that suggests unconsciousness. Instead, she appears to be looking at something vast and complex, her expression shifting through wonder, fear, understanding, and finally a kind of peaceful acceptance. When she pulls away, tears are streaming down her face. "It's not an island," she whispers. "It's a message, a warning." She struggles to articulate what she experienced, her scientific vocabulary failing to capture the essence of what the sphere communicated. But gradually, a picture emerges. The island is a marker, placed here millennia ago by people or beings who understood that the ocean holds memory the way stone holds heat. They'd witnessed something, some great catastrophe or transformation, and they'd created this place as a warning for those who would come after. The island appears when conditions align, when the same confluence of factors that preceded the ancient disaster begins to manifest again. You ask what disaster, what danger could be so important that it warranted creating something that defies the laws of nature? Sarah shakes her head, frustrated by the limitations of language and human perception. "It's about balance," she says finally. "The ocean, the land, the boundary between them. When that balance shifts too far, when too much is taken or too much is given, the system corrects itself. Violently, the implications settle over you like a heavy blanket. The rising sea levels, the changing ocean chemistry, the warming waters, all the environmental changes that your expedition has been documenting. According to the sphere's message, these aren't just concerning trends. They're symptoms of an approaching threshold, a point of no return after which the ocean will reclaim what it has lost, reshaping coastlines and swallowing cities in a correction that has happened before and will happen again. The sun is touching the horizon now, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seem too vivid to be natural. The figures on the beach have multiplied, dozens of them now, perhaps hundreds. They're moving toward the water, their forms becoming more translucent as they approach the waves. You realize with a chill that you're watching the same departure you'd seen in your vision, the island's creators returning to the ocean that spawns them, or accepting it as their final resting place. Sarah is frantically trying to document everything, but her equipment is failing in increasingly spectacular ways. Cameras short out, batteries drain in seconds, recording devices capture only static. The island is preparing to depart, and it seems determined not to leave behind evidence that would let the world dismiss its warning as fantasy or fraud. You feel it in your bones when the transition begins. A subtle shift in the air pressure, a change in the way sound travels, as if reality is holding its breath. The sphere on its platform begins to glow, not with light exactly, but with a kind of concentrated darkness that somehow illuminates rather than obscures. The ruins around it start to hum, a sound that you feel more than hear, resonating at a frequency that makes your teeth ache and your vision blur. "We need to leave," you tell Sarah, grabbing her arm. "Now." She resists for a moment, unwilling to abandon the opportunity for observation, but then she feels it too. The island pulling away from the world, sliding back into whatever impossible space it occupies between appearances. You run for the beach, your equipment abandoned, the scientific method forgotten in the face of more primal imperatives. The inflatable boat seems impossibly far away, though it can't be more than 100 meters. The sand is changing beneath your feet, becoming less solid, more fluid, as if the island is already halfway to being ocean again. The figures in the water watch you struggle toward salvation, their expressions understanding but unsympathetic. This is the price of knowledge, their ancient eyes seem to say. This is the burden of witness. You reach the boat and shove it into the water, Sarah tumbling in beside you. Your hands fumble with the oars, clumsy with panic and haste. Behind you, the island is visibly sinking now, the ruins disappearing beneath rising water, the strange vegetation folding in on itself like a flower closing at nightfall. The sphere's glow intensifies one final time, and in that flash you see it all clearly. The pattern, the cycle, the inevitable conclusion that waits at the end of current trends. The research vessel seems to take forever to reach, though Captain Booty has brought it as close as he dares. Hands reach down to pull you aboard, voices asking questions you can't yet answer. You collapse on the deck, gasping, watching the place where the island had been. There's nothing there now but water, reflecting the last light of day, giving no indication that anything unusual ever existed in that spot. Sarah sits beside you, her scientific composure finally cracking. She's laughing and crying simultaneously, the sound slightly hysterical, but also somehow triumphant. You've witnessed something impossible, something that will change how you understand the world, even if you can never prove it to anyone else. That night, as the research vessel motors away from the coordinates that now show nothing but empty ocean, you and Sarah compile your evidence. The blurred photographs, the inconsistent sample readings, the equipment failures, all of it adds up to a story that no one will believe. But you have to try. The island appeared for a reason, delivered its warning to those who would listen. You spend hours writing the report, trying to find words that convey the urgency without sounding like madness. Sarah contributes technical details, scientific observations, anything that might lend credibility. When you're finished, you both know it's not enough. The world isn't ready to believe in impossible islands and ancient warnings delivered through obsidian spheres. The evidence is too ambiguous, too easily dismissed. But as dawn breaks on a new day, you realize that belief isn't actually necessary. The warning has been delivered, whether anyone accepts it or not. The island will appear again when conditions warrant, will continue its cycle of emergence and submergence, faithful to its purpose across centuries and millennia. You stand on the deck and look back toward the horizon, toward the spot where the impossible briefly became real. The ocean keeps its secrets well, you think, but sometimes when the need is great enough, it shares them with those who have the courage to listen. Captain Booty joins you at the rail, his weathered face thoughtful. "My grandfather saw it once," he says quietly. "Told me stories when I was young. I thought he was just an old man, his mind going, making up tales." He pauses, then adds, "I'm sorry I didn't believe him. I understand now why he spent his last years trying to warn people about the ocean's patience running out." The research vessel sails on through calm seas, carrying you back toward a world that will never quite make sense again. Somewhere in your cabin, the sample container sits with its impossible sand, still shifting into patterns that might be writing or might be random movement. The photographs fill your camera's memory, blurred evidence of something that existed between one moment and the next. You know you'll spend the rest of your career trying to understand what you witnessed, trying to decode the warning, trying to find a way to make people listen. Sarah will too, her scientific skepticism transformed into evangelical certainty by the touch of the sphere. Together, you'll become those people others whisper about. the scientists who claim to have found an island that can't exist, who warn about disasters written in ancient stone and encoded in volcanic glass. But on quiet nights, when sleep eludes you, and the sound of waves reminds you of that impossible shore, you'll know the truth. The island will appear again, exactly when it needs to, carrying its message forward through time. And somewhere, the ocean keeps its vigil, patient and eternal, waiting to see if humanity will finally learn to listen before the balance tips too far and the correction begins. The warning has been given. The rest, as it always has been, is up to those who have the wisdom to heed it. Sleep to history's mysteries. The lost continents. The world quiets around you as night settles in, and as your thoughts drift like distant tides against the darkened shore, we step softly into the half-remembered places of the earth. You breathe slowly, gently, letting the last traces of the day dissolve. The oceans deepen around us. The stars draw faint silver lines across the sky, and beneath that vastness lies a question as old as humanity itself. What vanished beneath the waves? What worlds were lost to time? Tonight we drift back, far back, into the silent waters of history's greatest mysteries. The lost continents, whispered in ancient texts and echoed in geological riddles, pull us into their quiet embrace. They are places that shimmer at the edge of memory, half myth, half possibility, suspended somewhere between science and dreams. They exist in that tranquil space where facts cradle legends, and where legends fall gently into the sea. Let your breathing settle into a soft rhythm. Let the mind loosen like soft sand under tide. We begin now, drifting across the surface of the world's forgotten lands. Far beneath the Atlantic Ocean, the water is still and old, colder than memory, darker than unlit caverns. Here lie the first whispers. Atlantis, Plato's voice, drifts through time like a quiet tide, telling of a grand island empire, rich in shining temples, wide avenues, and circular harbours carved with mathematical perfection. It was said to be larger than Libya and Asia combined, a jewel of the ancient world, until the sea claimed it in a single day and night of ruin. Imagine, for a moment, gliding silently above that deep ocean floor. The water stretches endlessly, a world without wind or wave in this nighttime calm. And somewhere far below, layered in silt and quiet darkness, may rest the faintest ghost of a world that once breathed. Stone pillars fallen like forgotten memories, pathways swallowed in shifting sand, the outlines of a city that may have lived only in story, or may have existed long before recorded time, when coastlines were younger and seas had not yet risen to swallow the world. Atlantis is the most famous of the lost continents, but it is only one dream among many. The earth has forgotten more shores than it remembers. Let your breath slow, like waves washing over worn stone. Far to the south, beyond the cold currents curling around Africa's edge, ancient sailors whispered of Lemuria, a continent stretching across the Indian Ocean, an ancestral homeland of forgotten peoples or vanished creatures. It was proposed in the days before plate tectonics, an attempt to explain mysteries of biology and migration, but its name lingered. Lemuria became a place not of science, but of imagination, lush, tropical, a cradle of early humanity, or lost civilizations whose temples now lie beneath coral and drifting sand. Some pictured it as swaying with emerald forests and rivers wide as seas. Others imagined tall white cities rising above turquoise lagoons. And in every imagining, Lemuria sank long before recorded memory, leaving only fragments in myths from India, Madagascar, Indonesia, and beyond. Now, imagine drifting above that warm sea. The moonlight rests over the water, like a thin sheet of silver. Beneath the surface, shadows shift as if remembering shorelines. Long vanished volcanic ridges curl upward like the silhouettes of broken mountains. The ocean floor drops and rises in quiet patterns, hinting at the possibility that once, long ago, something vast stood here, kissed by sun and wind. You float, weightless, letting your thoughts move slowly, gently. But let us drift farther still to the Pacific, largest, deepest expanse of water on Earth, a world unto itself, a place of silence older than civilization. Here lie legends that predate even the oldest stone carvings, the stories of Mu, long before modern theories. Mystics and Victorian explorers spoke of a continent stretching across the Pacific, home to a sophisticated ancient people who built temples and monuments across what are now small scattered islands. Perhaps Hawaii, Tahiti, Rapa Nui, Easter Island were once mountaintops of a vast land swallowed by the sea. Perhaps the colossal Moai statues are not signs of isolation, but remnants of a culture connected by land that is now gone. As you drift deeper into calm, imagine following the currents toward Rapa Nui. The waves lap gently around giant stone faces staring eternally toward the horizon behind them. Green slopes rise, and beyond them, ocean. Only ocean. Yet the Polynesian stories speak of Hiva, their ancestral home, a great island or continent destroyed in a cataclysm. And as your mind wanders softly through the night, you may picture lush valleys, stone temples, terraces crawling up mountainsides, all now buried beneath an endless Pacific blue. The idea of Mu lingers, not because it is proven, but because it resonates with something deep in the human spirit, a desire to understand where we came from and what worlds existed before us. The ocean holds so many secrets, and silence is often mistaken for absence. Let your shoulders loosen. Let the quiet flow through you like a warm tide. Across the world, ancient maps and legends speak of lands now swallowed or shifted. When Earth's crust moved and changed, when ice sheets melted and seas rose by hundreds of feet, entire landscapes vanished Sundaland. Once a sprawling extension of Southeast Asia, was a vast, fertile region during the last ice age. Rivers wound through plains where now only the South China Sea lies. Human ancestors may have walked along great valleys and settled in coastal cities, now lost to the deep. Slowly, as the glaciers melted, the sea crept forward like a silent tide, filling riverbeds, covering forests, and turning mountains into islands. Indonesia, Malaysia, Borneo, and the Philippines are fragments of a world once whole, a world now hidden beneath warm tropical waters. Imagine traveling through these Pacific shallows in the soft night. The moon reveals faint shapes beneath the waves, ridges, plateaus, perhaps the outlines of ancient river channels. In the quiet of sleep, it is easy to imagine lights glowing faintly in the deep, lanterns of forgotten villages, or fires long extinguished, but remembered by the earth. Night deepens around us. We drift westward now, toward the Mediterranean, once far lower, carved by rivers flowing through what are now deep basins. When the Atlantic poured in millions of years ago, it transformed the landscape entirely. In this place of shifting seas and rising stones, some believed in the lost land of Tartessos, an ancient Iberian kingdom of silver and bronze. of traders and storytellers, swallowed by floods or earthquakes. Others imagine the long-lost island of Lyonesse off the coast of Britain, a land of saints and monasteries drowned in a single night. Fishermen still tell of church bells ringing from beneath the waves. Whether myth or memory, such stories cling to coastlines everywhere, reminders that the sea slowly reclaims all things. Let your breathing soften, let the weight of the past settle into a gentle whisper. Toward the far north, beneath ice and shifting tectonic plates, lies the mystery of Hyperborea, an ancient land of eternal spring in the frozen realms beyond the north wind. It appears in Greek text as a paradise untouched by war or sorrow. Some equated it with lands that once lay ice-free during warm epochs. Others saw it as pure myth. But the Earth's climate has shifted many times, and there were ages when the Arctic was green, wrapped in forests and warm breezes. Beneath Greenland's ice sheet lies evidence of ancient vegetation, lakes, and flowing rivers. Worlds erased not by water, but by ice. When your mind rests in the darkness of night, it becomes easier to imagine that once, far above the world, there flourished a land of gentle sunlight and unending calm. And still we drift. South now, to the rim of the Pacific, where the Bering Land Bridge once connected Asia and America. A broad plain, now lost beneath frigid waters, may have supported entire cultures, scattered settlements, and the first human migrations into the New World. The wind that blows over the Bering Sea carries the faintest echo of footsteps across a land long gone. And farther still, beneath the cold waves of the North Sea, lies Doggerland, once the heart of Europe's prehistoric world. It stretched between Britain and Scandinavia, teeming with wildlife, forests, and human settlers. Then, slowly, the sea rose. A tsunami struck, and the land faded, leaving behind only fishing nets that occasionally drag up bones, tools, and fragments of a forgotten life. All across the world, the Earth has erased continents, not always through sudden catastrophe, but often through slow, gentle transformation, like a tide reshaping a shoreline grain by grain. Let your thoughts drift like these grains. Let the quiet carry you. The stories of lost continents are not simply tales of destruction, but reminders of how deeply the world has changed. Shorelines are temporary mountains rise and fall. Forests become seas. Seas become deserts. Civilizations blossom and wither. The earth is ancient, far older than memory, older than legend, older than the words we use to describe time itself. You float now in a world of possibility, imagining coastlines lit by torchlight, temples glowing beneath starlit skies, entire continents alive with cultures that vanished long before anything was written in stone. You drift, calm and weightless, through the stories the ocean keeps. The sea is vast, and so are the memories hidden beneath it. And as we continue this quiet journey toward the deepest, oldest mysteries the planet has ever known, we move ever closer to the edge where myth and history begin to blur, where the ether whispers drift through the deep like soft currents, moving through time as effortlessly as the tide. And as we descend again into that vastness of quiet ocean and forgotten worlds, your breathing stays slow and gentle, like the steady rhythm of waves washing over an ancient shore. Darkness below grows thicker, but it is not a frightening darkness. It is warm, familiar, like a blanket of time settling over the earth. hiding secrets too old for writing, too large for memory. We drift deeper, letting the ancient waters guide us into places long submerged, long silent. Somewhere in that stillness, there lies an understanding that the continents beneath our feet are not fixed things. They shift, they drift, they crumble, and sometimes they vanish entirely. Just as the mind sheds thoughts as it moves toward rest, so too does the earth shed landscapes, trading mountains for plains, shores for seas, land for water. Entire worlds are born, erased, and reborn again across millions of years, each one slipping quietly into the next like a dream, fading into another dream. We drift now towards Zealandia, one of the most extraordinary lost continents of all. Unlike Atlantis, Mu, or Lemuria, Zealandia is not legend but geological truth. Almost the size of Australia, it lies submerged beneath the Pacific Ocean, with only the mountain peaks visible today, as New Zealand, New Caledonia, and a few scattered islands. For millions of years, it rose and fell with tectonic breath. Then, long ago, the sea gently swept across it, leaving only fragments above water. Imagine hovering above its drowned surface. The moonlight paints a soft silver glow across the waves. Beneath them lies a vast plateau, carved by rivers that have not run for tens of millions of years. There are valleys deep enough to hold entire mountain ranges, and mountains tall enough to once have scraped the sky. But all of it now rests under the weight of the ocean, a continent hiding in plain sight, a reminder that even the land we know today can slip quietly into the sea. We breathe softly, drifting. The water grows calm around us. To the west, beneath the Bay of Bengal, lies another mystery, the rumoured lost land of Kumari Kandam. In Tamil tradition, it was said to be a cradle of ancient civilization, a great southern continent connecting India to Antarctica. Modern geology tells another story, yet the legend persists in the hearts of millions. The tale of a land once filled with poets, scholars, and sages. Like many lost worlds, it may carry memories of real ancient floods, coastal plains drowned by rising seas after the last ice age, villages swallowed slowly as the shoreline crept inland. Imagine walking along a prehistoric coast where families once lived, where fires once burned, where waves once washed against soil, now hundreds of feet below the modern ocean. As the water rose, inch by inch, year by year, the land receded. Stories remained. Over time, the stories became legend, and legends became the lost continent of Kumari Kandam. The earth is shaped not only by mountains and seas, but also by memory, and memory changes shape as gently as waves smoothing stone. We drift now toward the middle of the Indian Ocean, where the sea floor reveals scars, ridges, plateaus, and sunken fragments of an ancient world. Beneath the Mauritius waters lies evidence of a lost microcontinent called Mauritia, hidden beneath layers of volcanic rock and coral. Long before humans walked the earth, Mauritia split and sank beneath the waves, leaving only Madagascar, India, and tiny island chains as hints of its existence. It had no cities, no temples, no people, but its disappearance shows how easily even whole continents can vanish, leaving only geological whispers behind. Let your shoulders relax, your breath slow and deep. The world grows quieter, softer, more distant. Around us, the planet's history stretches far beyond human memory. There were times when Earth's landmasses were assembled into supercontinents, Pangaea, Gondwana, Laurasia, vast sweeping realms where deserts stretch from horizon to horizon, and forests ran unbroken across thousands of miles. But before these giants rose, others existed: Rodinia, Columbia, Nuna, each forming, breaking, drifting, and dissolving into oceans that have long since changed shape. Imagine watching continents move as if in slow motion. You stand on ancient stone while mountains rise like long, soft breaths of the earth's seas melt away. Rivers carve new paths, valleys deepen, islands drift apart. Everything shifts so slowly that it feels motionless, yet over millions of years, entire worlds rearrange themselves. This is the Earth's quiet truth. Continents are momentary arrangements in an ocean of time. And yet, even against this immense backdrop, human stories cling tightly to vanished lands. We hear echoes of them in Polynesian chants, in Greek philosophy, in Indian epics, in Egyptian priestly tales, and in medieval legends whispered across coastlines. Many cultures speak of lands taken by the sea, sometimes in violent storms, sometimes in gentle rises that unfolded over generations. These stories may not be literal histories, but they capture something true about humanity, that people remember the sea moving, rising, swallowing land. They remember coasts that no longer exist. They remember migrations forced by tides, and over thousands of years, these memories become mythic continents, lost to all but the imagination. Let your mind drift through this tapestry of ancient memory. Let it unravel gently, like mist over a calm morning shore. The Mediterranean hides traces of Bronze Age settlements drowned by earthquakes and shifting coastlines. The Black Sea may have once been a freshwater lake until the ocean broke through, flooding entire valleys. In Japan, sunken ruins off Yonaguni resemble stepped pyramids, carved by nature, perhaps, or shaped by early humans whose world was slowly overtaken by water. Off the coast of India, near Dwarka, divers found stone structures covered in coral, hinting at settlements older than recorded civilization. Everywhere the sea touches land, the sea eventually takes it back. We drift west again toward the Atlantic. Beneath the waters near the Bahamas lie the Bimini Road, rectangular stones arranged in a pattern that some believe are remnants of an ancient civilization. More likely they are natural formations, but even so, their shape invites the imagination to wander. And imagination is part of what keeps lost continents alive. As you breathe softly, the story continues to unfold like a gentle tide. The Azores rise from a deep Atlantic ridge where volcanic mountains push through the sea. Some believe these islands were once peaks of a larger landmass. Ancient maps drawn before the discovery of the Americas showed phantom islands dotting this ocean. Antillia, Brazil, High Brazil, lands that sailors insisted they saw, even if no one could ever find them again. Perhaps they were tricks of light upon the water, perhaps they were misremembered coastlines, or perhaps, long ago when sea levels were lower, these places truly existed above the waves. As night wraps its calm around your thoughts, you drift through these possibilities without needing answers. The beauty of lost continents lies not in proving them, but in wondering about them. Far to the south, Antarctica itself may guard ancient landscapes buried beneath miles of ice, mountain ranges, valleys, and maybe lakes untouched for millions of years. There were ages when this icy world was covered in forests, where warm breezes carried moisture across a land now locked in frozen silence. Beneath its glaciers may rest fossils of unknown species, traces of climates long forgotten. Antarctica was once part of Gondwana, connected to Australia, Africa, India, South America. When these continents tore apart, Antarctica moved southward, slowly freezing into its modern stillness. Imagine that slow drift, the land becoming colder and quieter, the forests withering, the final rivers freezing into silence, the continent turning to ice, carrying inside it the memory of warm, ancient worlds now completely lost. You sink deeper into calm, and from these geological secrets, we return once more to the human stories, the legends that keep the world's imagination alive. For even if Atlantis never existed as a physical place, it exists as an idea, a reminder of fragility, of knowledge lost, of civilizations that rise and fall like tides. Lemuria symbolizes migration, the mystery of origins, the yearning to understand where humanity began. Mu represents the vastness of the Pacific and the deep time woven into island cultures. Kumari Kandam reflects ancient flood memories and the shifting of coastlines over millennia. All these stories are maps, not of land, but of longing. As you drift, the world grows softer around you. Thoughts slow, breathing settles. The continents of the earth fade into silhouettes beneath a dark ocean sky. Even if no ancient advanced civilizations existed on these lost continents, the planet is full of forgotten worlds, real landscapes that vanish beneath rising seas as the Ice Age ended. Entire regions the size of countries now lie underwater, filled with the remains of forests, plains, and possibly the footprints of people who lived close to the shifting shores. Wherever the ocean is deep, there is the possibility of what once was. Let your mind wander to the depths now, as though floating above the world in a gentle, timeless drift. The ocean is a vast library, its shelves made of stone, its pages written in layers of sediment. It keeps its stories locked beneath pressure and darkness, giving only subtle hints. A fossil lifted from the seabed, a submerged forest, a forgotten coastline revealed by sonar. The earth holds more history than we can ever uncover, and more mysteries than we can ever solve. You drift now through the last currents of the story, carried by slow, rhythmic waves. The lost continents around you fade into silhouettes, quiet and unreachable, but comforting in their mystery. They remind us that the world is not static. It is alive, constantly shifting, constantly remembering and forgetting. The ocean hums softly, its surface smooth beneath the moonlit sky. Somewhere far below, untouched for ages, lie the remnants of landscapes we will never fully map, mountains worn by time, valleys deepened by ancient rivers, shorelines erased long before the first human drew breath. The earth is ancient, and we are only passing through its memories. And as the story settles into silence, you remain weightless, calm, drifting between the known and the unknown. There is no urgency here, no need for answers, only the soft comfort of possibility, of imagining worlds hidden just beyond reach. The continents that once were and may never be again rest beneath the sea in eternal quiet, but in your mind they drift on, glowing faintly like lanterns carried across dark waters, guiding you toward rest. You exhale slowly. The night deepens, the waves still. The lost continents fade into peaceful darkness, and you drift gently, softly, into sleep. Earth's forgotten continents whisper softly from the depths.